Hi, my name is David, and I'm a father. I'll share with you a text message that I got from one of my 4 daughters this morning. Catherine's 13. She always tells me she misses me when I go away. So her text message this morning read, Dad, I know they'll love you. And even if they don't, I do. That's a really important part of why I do the work that I do. David was mentioning that my foray, and so I'll tell a little bit about the introduction of me into this work. But my professional introduction to fathering work came actually when I was working with Aboriginal people in Edmonton and throughout Alberta. I was putting together a book. It's titled Visions of the Heart, Canadian Aboriginal Issues. Working with Aboriginal writers and academics across Canada putting together this book. And when the book went into its 2nd edition in 2000, and I was sitting with people in different communities listening to them talk, and I kept hearing this phrase over and over again, my people. Now, I happened to be in my early 40s at the time. And so while I wasn't necessarily going through the typical life crisis we talk about men going through, that phrase, my people, I couldn't get away from it. And so the question that kept coming to me over and over again was, who are my people? Well, the first thing that occurred to me, because I do a lot of work with men's groups, various types of men's groups in the city of Edmonton, is my people are men. And I connect with men across boundaries, across social categories. But then I'm also a dad. I have 4 daughters, and I had the experience of becoming a father well before my children were born. And that's what became evident to me, which is why I got into this work, that from the time I was a little boy, I was becoming a father. And that didn't occur to me until I actually became a father. And not just in terms of the role that my father played in my life and then my stepfather after my folks were divorced. But as I was talking with Chris just before I came up this morning, that we have men in our lives who play all kinds of roles. And those are supportive roles, not necessarily formal fathering roles, but roles that actually contribute as mentors, as hockey coaches, as teachers, as fathers of our friends, fathers in the religious context that we take part in. And so I became very aware that while on the one hand there was lots of discussion, lots of research, lots of programs about mothers, because this was about 10 years ago, and I was doing the work with the men's groups in Edmonton, that there was huge obstacles, and what I saw as a serious blindness to the essential role that men play in the lives of boys. I was also very aware, having gone through 4 births, of the way in which I was treated throughout the process. Now, we had actually our 2nd, 3rd, and 4th children. Well, and I'll name them. Jenica is 21, Bethany is 19, Sarah is 16, and Catherine is 13. Well, Jenica was born in a hospital. The next 3 were born at home. And even though we went through the midwifing process and, I learned how to breathe, although I didn't learn how to breathe. I passed out whenever I tried. That I was also, even in this group of people who were very sensitive of the importance of supporting the fathers and having the couple work prior to the birth, that I was still excluded. I remember I could probably count on one hand the number of times when Karen was pregnant, in the 4 times she was pregnant with our children, where I was asked, how do you feel? And so when I started getting into this work and working with these men's groups, what really struck me was the response the men had in these groups, open, trusting groups, when they were asked, so how do you feel? How do you feel as a man? How do you feel as a dad? How do you feel as an employee? How do you feel sitting in this group? And overwhelmingly, there was not confusion, not concern, not anger, but relief. Relief that finally someone was asking them, how do you feel about your life? What's going on in your life? And what can I do to support you? In terms of my research, I guess it was a year and a half ago, I completed a policy paper for FIRA. David mentioned the Father Involvement Research Alliance. A paper entitled All Dads Matter, towards a socially inclusive vision for father involvement in Canada. And by the way, if you visit the FIRA website, there's probably links on the BC Council page, but there's all kinds of resources. It's an amazing site, and including research papers as well as ideas for practitioners and policy developers and that sort of thing. Excuse me. And my interest in social inclusion was that I wasn't raised by just a dad who looked like me. I was raised by many different men, many different population groups, ethnic groups, religious groups have played a part in mentoring me to become a father. And they continue to. I have 4 daughters. I'm still becoming a father. It's a work in progress. One of the things that I keep asking and keep pointing out in the father involvement settings that I take part in is the fact that we have to use the term father involvement. And the fact that you never, like I never hear anybody use the term mother involvement. It's nowhere in the literature. No one's doing research on it. And so, I mean, it just strikes me as pretty obvious that, well, we don't, because people see that as redundant. And our hope, I think, is that at some point, we will stop having to use the term father involvement to justify our research, to get policy support and program support for dads. That we'll come to the point where, in fact, we see that fathers are involved. Fathers do love their kids. Fathers are nurturing. And, of course, fathers don't have all the answers. What we know. Well, and you all know this. There's lots of research to support this. But I think you know this as practitioners, you know this as parents, you know this as adults. We know that parents are the primary safety net of their children. We know that loving, caring fathers benefit their children. They contribute to the health and well-being of their children. We know that mothers really enjoy getting support. They benefit from that support, and the children benefit from that support. And families and communities benefit from that support. Let's put fathers in the equation. Let's talk about the fundamental benefit of fathers being involved, but also benefiting from the support of the same programs, the same services, the same communities, the same attitudes, the same beliefs, and ways in which we act that benefit mothers and families. And this is often hard to admit, but we know that fathers are human, and that they need all the support they can get. By the way, you'll notice that my presentation has lots of pictures. If I If you take one thing away today, please take away that everyone benefits from positive images of fathers. Everyone. And it particularly speaks to men. Because we know, men are visual, right? We don't buy the magazines for the articles. So what's the problem? Well, in the literature on men's help-seeking behavior, and generally in our culture, on the one hand, men tend to be blamed for not seeking help, and they're ridiculed when they do. Here's an honest story about our coordinator. Last night I was picked up from the airport by David. And so we were going to be driving out to the hotel and do an interview and have some dinner. Well, an hour and a half later, David pulls over and pulls out his BlackBerry or whatever, his GIS, to actually get directions because we were lost. We drove around Vancouver for an hour and a half. Now, it was a great conversation, and so I'm not saying anything about that. However, what really struck me, and even saying it now, right? I can tell it as a joke. I can tell it as an anecdote that men don't ask for help. And we ridicule men for not asking for help. Well, I think a really important part of thinking about men's help-seeking behavior is that we ask the question, not in a blaming way, look at men who don't ask for help, but let's ask in terms of our own cultural attitudes and values, in terms of the way we see and treat men, whether we're male or female, because we're all socialized to see men in a certain way, male and female. But let's ask ourselves, well, what might be the obstacles to men asking for help? What contributes in our culture to men believing that they don't need to ask for help, or that they shouldn't ask for help? So what is it about the teaching that we get and the ways in which we interact that contributes, in the end, to men not asking for help? Secondly, and this was, I made this point earlier, fathers and those they care about benefit immensely when fathers receive support. Now, why is that a problem? Well, I'm sure most, if not all of you know, that overwhelmingly service providers, human service providers, and actually those who deliver supports to other people, so we can do education, we can do health care, physical health as well as mental health, social services, etc., overwhelmingly, they're female. Well, we did a survey in Edmonton a few years back, called it an EnviroScan. I've learned a lot of social work language, by the way, since I've been doing this. So we did an EnviroScan of services in the city of Edmonton, services for men. And then after that, I did a similar scan of services in Stony Plain for fathers. And Stony Plain is just outside, community just outside of Edmonton. And we asked people very simple questions. We asked them, so, what kinds of services do you provide? Are those services provided to the general population? What services do you specifically provide to men? And then in the second study, to fathers. And so I was quite struck when we got the responses. And I was kind of disappointed because I was hoping to see that there was a disparity between the general services that were provided and then services for men and fathers. In fact, most people said, well, we provide services for everybody. But then the question I asked was, and what proportion of the services that you provide are male-friendly? Well, what response do you think I got? I mean, out of probably 80% of the respondents on the survey, they noted in certain words, gee, that's a really good question. We've never thought about that before. Now, the really striking thing was 70% of those respondents, and the one in the city of Edmonton, we had a sample of 156 organizations represented. Half of those organizations responded. So we had 78 organization representatives respond to this survey of Services for Men, serving over the course of the year roughly 350,000 clients. So I mean, it's a very representative sample. 70% of those respondents only provide services to men, and 80% of them had never considered the question, what's a male-friendly service look like? Now, I don't know about you, but I find that quite striking. And I'll get into in a moment what's particularly troubling about that, and perhaps how we can then deal with it. Now, what was also interesting was that not a majority of the respondents, but probably about, I would say, maybe 20 people also included in the survey, and I hadn't asked this question, also included in their response. Has anyone ever asked that question about women? Like, why do we assume that just because women deliver services and women provide programs and develop them, that they're necessarily female-friendly? Right, and I mean, I couldn't answer the question, and actually I wasn't interested in exploring it because I was doing men. But I think that's something to think about in your organizations and in the development of policies. You know, is our understanding of what it means to be male and what it means to be female and the lives that we actually live, do they coincide with the attitudes and assumptions that guide policy and program development? And now I can't answer that because each of you work within your own organizations. But it seems to me that's exploring something that's vital if you are actually going to serve the needs of the people you want to serve. So, what hinders a man from telling his story? I'll let you take a moment with the images. Well, and what I want you to be thinking about too, and I hope the dialogue can grow today over this, is that all of this affects not just the development of programs, but all of these issues affect what happens within your organization between your employees. So our attitudes, right? How we learn, all of us, not just men, not just fathers, but how we learn as human beings what it means to be a man will affect the way we see men in our organizations. It will affect how we see the ministers and deputy ministers and the teachers and the people who are putting together policy as well as teaching our children, as well as working and directing our organizations. Secondly, gender stereotyping. What we learn it means to be a man or to not be a man. Again, that always, I mean, throughout our lives, affects every one of us. That's particularly striking in these men's groups that I work. I ask them two questions. I say, guys, I want to engage you with two questions today that I want you to think about for the rest of your life, because the answer to the two questions will change throughout your life. And the first question is, what does it mean to be a man in Canada today? Now, you can ask the same question, since this is about fathers and father involvement. What does it mean to be a father in Canada today? And the second question is, and who are you? Because what it means to be a man in Canada today, what it means to be a father in Canada today, and we can break it down into what does it mean to be a father in Kamloops? What does it mean to be a father on a First Nations reserve? What does it mean to be a father who's a new immigrant and looking for work and probably driving a cab from the airport back and forth? I mean, we can go as specific as we want. And so there are social categories we can cover. But then I very purposely personalized the question. And for all of the men, it's again one of these aha experiences. That yeah, I see I'm expected to live a life, I'm expected to be something, I am measured against something, but then I'm also judged. And so, and I asked this person, or this question personally, on purpose. How do you view males? And how do you view fathers? Because if you're delivering programs, that's an essential question to deal with. If you're developing policy, that's an essential question to deal with. Not just how are they viewed in Canada, not just how are they portrayed in the media, but as human beings who are developing services, who are providing programs, who are talking to people about developing policies. How do you actually view males? Because how you view them will affect how you develop policies, the attitudes and the assumptions that underlie those policies. It will affect the program delivery. It will affect in your organizations the way in which colleagues talk to one another. Because you're not just thinking about fathers who are out there. If your colleague is a male, you're going to think about him in a particular way, even if he's a nice guy, right? The attitudes and assumptions don't go away. Famous, I'll do one sociological quote today. W.I. Thomas, back in 1920, wrote, and it's 1920, so take the language with a grain of salt. If men define situations as real, they are real in their consequences. Now, of course, the irony of that is W.I. Thomas was a man. He was living and working in a patriarchal culture. And so, of course, men were doing all the defining. And that's the society we got. Well, if people define something as real, if we define men as closed, as unemotional, as non-communicative, as violent, as confused, if we define men as celebrities, like, can you, I don't know about you, I can't imagine the life that Tiger Woods must be experiencing right now. Like, you know, all the celebrity aside. And I can't imagine the life that his children must be living right now, and the life that his wife must be living right now. Every once in a while, you see some commentators say, look, we got to leave these people alone. But of course, that's not their business, right? That's not how they make their money. But when we're talking about who we're treating, who we're supporting, who we're trying to develop policies and programs for, well, these are real live human beings, and the kids are live, and their partners or ex-partners, they're real live human beings. And so the way in which we think about them, the way in which we're told to think about them, even if it's really funny, right? I got to admit, I mean, Family Guy, as rude and obnoxious as it is, some of it is really funny. I can laugh at it. Well, we can all laugh at stereotypes, right? We can all laugh at limitation. We can all poke fun at it, but if we're not aware that that's how we're thinking about it, and if we're not aware of the impact that that has on the programs that we develop or that we don't develop, then we lose. So, on the one hand, we are given these cultural messages all over the place of what it means to be a male, what it means to be a father. Highly judgmental, very stereotypical. It's also the case that we're not only blamed for being that kind of person and seen as being that kind of person, because that's what it means to be a male and look at them, but also, and research continues to bear this out, there's this troubling set of assumptions that operate in our lives that culturally speaking, ethnic or immigrant fathers are very aware that they are being measured against a cultural ideal. Young fathers from 15 to 19 years old are very aware that they are being judged as being an unfit father because they're not financially stable. Right? They are not educated. They have not been responsible. And I mean, this operates very much in the background for most of us, right? And I know lots of you undoubtedly, and I can see it in the room, deal with diverse populations of fathers. But think of the experience of men in those diverse populations and why they get excluded, why they get ignored, and how they feel about their lives. They can't possibly be involved. They can't possibly be a good father because they don't have a job, because they don't know the language, because they don't know how to access the resources, because they're new to this country and they came from an incredibly patriarchal society. So they can't possibly be a good father because they're religiously conservative. And they're not on the bandwagon that says, you know, allow your children to do whatever you do, right? That you set certain structures, you set certain boundaries. So there's a suspicion there that, you know, well, you can't be a good father then. So, you know, we can argue about these. We can take these, I think, with a grain of salt. But if we think about the ways in which they operate in the background, they are an obstacle, not just for those of us who work and research in the field, but very much for fathers who want to seek services, who want support, but face a lot of obstacles and roadblocks. So, what hope can we give fathers? The number one question that animates my research, and this really hit me probably very early on in my research with Aboriginal people. And I'll tell you the brief story. I was down in working with the Stoney First Nation just outside of Morley, Alberta. It's about 50 kilometers outside of Calgary. And there were a lot of healing initiatives in the community. There was the particular chief and the band council had developed educational programs and family health programs, community health programs, upgrading programs, and lots of different kinds of supports. So they brought me in, and as a white outsider, but as a sociologist who was interested in working and supporting with communities, as an observer. And to ask me then as a sociologist to say, so, you know, can you tell us what you see happening in our community? And we can have a dialogue about that. Well, the reason that I got into working with Aboriginal people in the first place was I came from Ontario. And that's where I did all of my university studies, Wilfrid Laurier in Waterloo, and then University of Waterloo for my graduate work. And, well, let's just say that was a while ago. And what I found really striking about Ontario at the time, but I didn't really identify it until I came out to Alberta, was the fact that in Ontario at the time, and it was 25 years ago, you didn't really notice Aboriginal people. Nobody talked about them. Like there wasn't a presence. Now, granted, I lived in southern Ontario, but Aboriginal issues were not public, right? They weren't on the news. The Royal Commission hadn't been established yet, and so there were bits and pieces, but it was pretty much hidden.